Are you a beginner? Would you like to learn how to wet sand paint? Would you like to learn how to do high-end paint correction from a rotary buffer to a dual action buffer to the sanding paper? Every step of that process, there is, at least there should be, a healthy level of this thing called fear. Oh my gosh. Now fear, before I get you too fearful in this moment, is a good thing. A healthy amount of fear will prevent you from doing stupid things. Not enough fear will get you to do stupid things. But when it comes to wet sanding as a beginner, there's going to be every stage of that process: wet sanding, paint correction, the types of buffers, the types of compounds, speed, pressure, go down the list. It's overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just frozen with anxiety and fear to the point that you do nothing. And if you do nothing, you will get nothing results. So my goal today is to help you breathe and calm down and try to help you overcome the different stages of the fear that are going to be a natural part of the sequence in wet sanding and polishing techniques. So let's get started. And here we have the deck lid of the Hyundai Sonata. There's endless types of imperfections in this paint. Overall, the paint is horrid. Endless spider webbing, wash, scratch, go down the list. It's a rental car, and you know how they treat rental cars, like caca. But what I want to deal with specifically and test out a couple products is this scratch right here. Now, it's not what you call a deep scratch, meaning I cannot catch a fingernail on the edge of it, which is called the fingernail test. So that tells me that it's not that deep. But this paint surface is absolutely horrid. So what I want to do is I'm going to do some wet sanding. I'm going to talk about how, as a beginner, you will go into freak out mode and how fearful this process can actually be. And I'm going to try to help eliminate some of that fear if it's your first rodeo, or if you're getting new into detailing and you want to learn some color sanding or wet sanding techniques. And what I have going on here is two different types of lighting. I've got fluorescent bulbs here. I've got an LED here. Clearly the LED, which is brighter, so it's not a direct comparison, but the LED is really showing up the intensity of the imperfections of this paint. I would have to go in closer for the fluorescent to really show the same imperfections, because right here now it's catching the scratches. So we've got one that goes like this, we've got another one that comes down off of that main one, but when I catch it with the LED, it's so bright that it actually cancels out the scratch. You have to kind of go off grid, and then you can see the scratch over here. Now, I will admit that I am really going to go ghetto here. And what I mean by that, and by the way, I'm going to lose the wedding ring. That's a no-no because it's hard, and it will have a tendency to do damage that is unwanted. So I remove any jewelry that is hard and could possibly scratch. This stuff is rubber, leather, it's just a non-issue, so I wear it, no big deal. That could do some serious damage. I'm going to remove that. Now what I have here is a solution of O&R. It's basically 99% distilled water with a tiny bit of Optimum no rinse in it. It's just what I happen to use for a lubricant. Now when you do wet sanding, typically you're going to want running water, but this is why I'm going ghetto, to show you that you can break lots of rules and you can still get superior results. In so many ways, you do not have to think things. This is my Griot's basic random orbital. It's a 6-inch random orbital. It has now been downgraded and it does my messy work. One of the messy things that I do is wet sanding because it tends to sling and make a mess. I've got Meguiar's 1500 grit sanding discs. I'm not using an interface plate. That means a straight backing plate and disc. It's Velcro or hook and loop, so it literally attaches just like that. Normally, on something like this, I would prefer to use a soft interface plate. Once again, this panel is flat. I do not need to overthink it. And what I'm trying to do is correct specifically that deeper scratch there, but I also want to create a uniform scratch pattern on this entire area here. That way, when I buff it, everything's fixed and corrected. And just FYI, that was actually on a pretty fast speed. That was at 5.5. This buffer goes up to a 6. Normally, I would do that on a 3. Why did I choose to do it faster? I don't know. Just to break the rules. And I don't even know what the rules are. Now this is 1500 grit, which in today's world of detailing and the world of grits like 3000 and even 5000, this is what would be considered very aggressive sandpaper. Back 20 years ago when I was detailing, 1500 grit was as high as we could go. We would start out with 800 grit or 1000 or 1200, but to try to find 1500 grit, you actually had to go searching for it. So we're very spoiled these days. I'm also not taping it off because, well, for a few reasons. Let me explain. I'm not going for perfection here. I simply wanted to create a video for any beginner that is trying to learn how to wet sand, color sand. Back in the day we called it color sanding because this precedes the days of two-stage paint. So back in the day it was just a single-stage paint and you were literally working with the color coat. Now, because it's two-stage paint, I'm working with, yes, wait for it, clear coat. So they just call it wet sanding versus color sanding. Same concept. You could actually do it dry if you wanted to, but unless the sandpaper is made to do it dry, it tends to wad up with the spent or the sanded particles, and it clogs up the sanding paper. That's why the wetness actually allows the particles that you're sanding away to flow away and doesn't wad up the sanding disc. So here I am. It's not perfect. And what I mean perfect is that I can still tell that there's some orange peel to the surface. But the main area has been sanded completely flat. Now what I want to do is I want to bust out a DA and see what it's going to take to remove 1500 grit sanding marks. And this is part of that fear factor that I want to teach you beginners when it comes to doing wet sanding. First product I want to test out is Adam's Heavy Correcting Compound. Thumbs up to Adams, by the way. That guy, talk about passion, talk about a giver. I mean, the guy literally, he's so passionate about the industry. It's almost like he doesn't care about anything else other than producing phenomenal products and educating the world. So that, you just gotta love that. His enthusiasm is so contagious. So I'm gonna try this out first. Then I'm going to try out the griots. This is part of their BOSS system, Best of Show system, hence the acronym BOSS. It's called their Fast Correction Cream. I just got back from the SEMA show and I wanted to test this out for the first time. I have a feeling I know what's gonna happen. I'm not going to do the spoiler for you, but here I have a microfiber cutting pad. It has been used before. I think one time. It's been cleaned, so it's fine. It's good to go. I'm gonna put it back on the 6-inch orbital from griots. I'm gonna set it to a speed of 6 because 1500 grit sanding marks to remove with the DA, in my opinion, is not the way to go. If I was limited to a DA, I would actually follow up with either 2000 or 3000 grit sanding marks. But I really want to put this stuff through the test and see what kind of results I can pinch out of the moment right now. So this is all the polish I'm going to use to start with. Basically going to separate it in half. I'm gonna guess that I'm gonna have to come back in here with a rotary and a wool pad to really cut to the chase, but let's just see what happens. And I'm gonna set this speed to max speed because once again, I need maximum capability here. Now I got my cloth from Auto Fiber. This is an edgeless, what's called an edgeless cloth. It has the same type of nap or pile on both sides. So far, I am in love with them. And lo and behold, it pretty much did exactly what I thought it would do. And this is the scary part for beginners, is regardless of how much sanding you do, regardless of how fine the sandpaper is you are going to approach every part of this process with a great amount of fear. If you are not approaching it with fear, in my world, there's something wrong, because fear is a good thing. It keeps you from doing stupid things. Too much fear will keep you forever on the fence, not able to pull the trigger and do something. So you need a healthy balance of fear. In this moment, fear can actually prevent you from moving forward. So that's what I'm trying to get you to overcome, is the fear factor. So what happens is that you're already fearful because it's like, oh my gosh, what if I've sanded too much clear coat away? And now I take the buffer to it. I know I've got to remove the sanding marks. But once again, what if I polish away the clear coat? Well, there's a whole lot of things or variables included in that equation. How thick is the clear coat? Do you have a thickness gauge? Which, by the way, I don't overthink in most cases unless I'm really doing high-end, high-level paint correction and wet sanding. In most cases, I just want to correct it with the simplest procedure in the least aggressive method that I can for what I consider real-world cars, for real-world people. Daily drivers, that type of stuff. Maybe they want some scratches removed, so they're concerned with their car, but they accept the limitations of their life, which is it's a daily driver, it's gonna get dirty, I'm not gonna be able to maintain a perfect, flawless finish. If you create it for me, Darren, I'm also not really willing to pay for it because in a large way, it just doesn't make sense. So back to the fear factor, which is, okay, now I've just polished it, but yet the sanding marks are not gone. Well, that's because you did not polish enough to actually remove the sanding marks. So that's where you then come back in and you polish some more. But in the meantime, in your head, it's this big mind F because you're going, oh my gosh, what if I polish too much? What if? And you play this mind game, and it literally will drive you into this frenzy of fear that you just don't know what to do. And I remember these moments, 20, 25 years ago where it's like, oh my gosh, I really don't know what I'm doing. I know what I gotta do. I know I need to learn how to do it. So there was no formal training back then, so you just had to trial and error it. Well, I wanted to trial and error it, but I didn't want to do damage to the car that was permanent. I actually wanted to fix the car, as in remove the scratch. So this is the learning curve that I had to go through, but I didn't have someone looking over my shoulder and instructing me and telling me like, hey Darren, you're safe, don't worry about it, this is part of the process. You just haven't taken this step far enough to get the results that you want. The results that we're after in this moment is to remove the sanding marks, 1500 grit sanding marks. And by the way, that's not unrealistic. In the body shop world, they're removing 1200. That's kind of the benchmark, is how fast will a buffer, a pad, and a compound remove 1200 grit sanding marks. That's kind of the benchmark, and that's where they start with. Everything past that's kind of icing on the cake. So the fact that you can actually sand with 2000 grit or 3000 grit, because if I had sanded with 3000 grit, I would have had to sand longer. It would not have flattened this out as quickly as the 1500. But the trade-off is that when I come to polish it, it's going to polish up to perfection much quicker. And I'm not limited by the buffer or the pads I have to use in doing so. So everything has its trade-offs. So there it was with the Adams Heavy Correction Compound. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean the pad, and now I'm gonna use some of the Griots Fast Correction Cream. Once again, it does not require massive amounts of polish. Because this was a sample given to me at the show, this dispenser is less than. So I'm gonna have to kind of finesse it onto the pad like this with my finger. This is what would be called seasoning it. So there it is. It's now seasoned with the Griots Fast Correction Cream. And let's see what happens over here. Okay, flip the microfiber over. Let's see the kind of results that we have gotten with the Griots. Okay, I would have to say that I spent a little more time buffing this section, but I would have to say that admittedly it did a better job at removing the sanding marks than the Adams did. But that's not the end-all be-all moment, because there's so many things, so many variables that go into a polish, a compound, the user experience. It's not just about will it get the results that you want. Factors like cost, the packaging itself, how easy is it to dispense, all those subtle nuances that when you're doing enough buffing will start to make a big difference, believe it or not. So it's not just the ability to produce the results, it's what I call the user experience. And the user experience often comes down to the subtleties of the moment. How long will it allow me to work? Does it dry up very quickly? Does it do a lot of dusting? There's just all kinds of things that go into the equation. As you get experience, you'll learn those things, and trust me, you will continue to buy and experiment with more and more buffing compounds, or I should say polishing compounds and polishes. So I can tell that this is going to take me too long. I don't want things to take longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip out the bad boy, which I call the rotary, and I'm going to just cut to the chase and show you how much quicker I can remove the sanding marks and the rest of the blemishes in this area. Okay, I'm busting out the bad boy. This is a rotary polisher. It spins on a single axis only. This is what's considered the red-headed stepchild of the industry. This is what people always claim does damage. Well, it's like guns. It's not really the gun that's the problem. It's the person behind the gun. So the person behind this gun, as in a rotary polisher, knows what he's doing. So this is a Flex. I happen to really like Flex. They make a quality tool. I'm going to set this at a level, and at the top of the Flex, it actually shows the markings. As a rule, I'm going to work between 1200 and 1500 RPMs, which on this is between a 3 and a 4. So let's just go with a setting of 4. You'll notice I've taped it off for protection, because in order to get down against this spoiler, I don't want to burn the edge of this inadvertently while I'm focused on removing the defects from this section of the deck lid. So what you may have noticed if you're a beginner is that probably seemed like a very healthy length of time that I'm tooling on this paint with a rotary buffer. Now, if you were here with me and I handed you the rotary buffer and put it in your hand and I just told you to keep going at it, you would probably start really going into fear mode, because you would think, surely I'm going to be burning through that clear coat. Well, I have enough experience to know that surely I am not going to burn through that clear coat doing what I'm doing. So that is part of the fear factor. That's part of the experience, the learning curve. So there's a lot I can teach you guys. But when it comes down to it, you're just going to have to get this stuff in your hands. You're going to have to just take that leap of faith and just start testing it yourself. What's cool, and this is why I love the rotary, it's just so effective. It can cut to the chase if you know what you're doing. The cool thing about the new rotaries is that you can dial it down to 600 RPMs. That is 600 RPMs. That is so slow that you can experiment with 600 RPMs, and then you can slowly escalate further and further. And what I mean by that is with greater and greater speed. So that's the cool thing with all the new rotaries, is they start at a super low operating speed. What that also means is that I can literally finish this to perfection and remove the swirl marks or hologramming by changing the pad to a foam pad, dialing down the RPMs, lifting up on the pressure. And that doesn't mean I lift up on the buffer. It obviously has to touch the surface. It just means I'm not pushing pressure down on it during the initial cut. So I just allow the buffer to rest, and whatever the weight the buffer is, that's the only weight I'm gonna do. But right now I'm gonna finish correcting the rest of this. I'm gonna clean this pad, and I'm gonna switch to the griots just to, I don't know, keep things fair. Once again, I'm setting it to a speed of 4, which is about 1200, or I'm sorry, it's actually more than that. Boy, this cream stuff is miserable to try to dispense from. You just make a big fat mess, but you know, if they're gonna get it into people's hands where they're gonna experiment with, what else are they gonna do, right? So I actually have more compound on here that I need, that I normally would put on, but I can just make adjustments so I don't make a big fat mess of everything. And I'm gonna finish polishing this area. So just to correct myself, setting 4 is 1500 RPMs. And this has what's called a soft start trigger, which means I can slowly start it, and I control the speed here, but because I set it at 4, when I have this control buried to the handle, it's not gonna go any faster than the actual speed setting. And hopefully that bad articulation made a little sense. Okay, so what I'm seeing, and I'll bring you in so you can scope it out yourself, is the scratches are, well, let me just hesitate for a moment. Is the surface flawless? No, it's not, because it was so heavily damaged that even after sanding it with 1500 grit sanding discs and buffing it, there's still some blemishes in the paint. I can still pick up some trace little blemishes, scratches, call it what you have. I'm still picking it up, and I can tell that there's swirl marks, which is normal. You know, with a rotary buffer and a wool pad, there's gonna be some swirl marks, but that's what I'm gonna deal with next. See if I catch the light right there, you can see some blemishes still in the paint. So that's where I would have to even be more aggressive if I was looking for perfection, but the trade-off would be that I would continue to lose more and more of the clear coat. But the scratches are gone. I've dramatically increased the texture of the paint, which means I flattened it out by using the sanding paper to remove the orange peel. And now I've removed the sanding marks with the buffer, and it's looking pretty amazing. What I want to do now is actually take it to completion and still use the rotary to do so. Now talk about mixing it up. Now what I've done is I've just added a different backing plate from Shoal Concepts, which is really cool because it's like a 2-in-1. I can separate this backing plate, and so it will take a smaller polishing pad. This is a 6-inch polishing pad. It's also a Shoal Concept spider pad, which has all these cuts into it, and they call it their spider pad, and there's some science behind that. I don't fully understand it right now. They certainly make a good pad. So I've got my flex buffer, got my Shoal Concepts backing plate, my Shoal Concepts foam spider pad with my Adams finishing polish. So talk about like breaking the rules for a lot of you and a lot of companies, because they're, as a rule, companies will design their products as a system. So everything is engineered and formulated to work specifically with or as a system. So the pad is manufactured to work with certain polishes. Polishes are formulated to work with certain pads, certain buffers, and that's what's called a systematic approach. I get it, it makes sense. But yes, there's still room to always break the rules. And if you have tuned into my channel before, you will know that I'm a big fan of breaking the rules, which is probably one of the reasons I work for myself and not for corporate America. At this point, the sanding marks are completely gone. All I'm worried about is removing the hologramming and finishing it to perfection. So when we pull it into the sunlight, it's not going to show buffer trails, buffer tracks, swirl marks, holograms, many labels for it. I don't want any of them. I'm going to dial this down to 900 RPMs. I'm not going to put much pressure on it. I'm just going to allow the pressure of the buffer, and I'm going to allow the pad and the polishes to do what they're designed to do without forcing the moment. Also, at this point, there's something I need to let you be aware of, and that's this tape line right here. So if this was in fact for a customer, which it is, it's for enterprise rent-a-car or rental cars. What happens here is I've now just polished this, sanded this to almost perfection, but now this area up here, there's going to be a definite line of what's called demarcation, a definite separation between really, really good and pretty damn bad. So what do I do about that? Well, there's a couple ways I can approach that. I could tap it really quickly with the rotary and a wool pad and just blend it in, or I can just, at this point, blend it in by increasing the pressure of this pad when I'm buffing it and increasing the speed, and now I can blend it in, still maintain a swirl-free finish, but blend in this little edge so there's not this separation that the eye will be able to pick up on. So I'm going to add a little more of the Adams finishing polish, and I'll show you it does not take much. Now this is a used pad, but I've cleaned it and it's stained up a little bit from different types of polishes, what have you. Point is it just doesn't require that much polish. If you're a beginner, you're going to overthink this part. You're going to think, oh, more is always better, and you're just going to put way too much polish, and it's actually going to be counterproductive. You can see how much sling and splatter I have going on here. That's because I put too much because of this dispenser of griots. You're just limited. It's a pain in the butt, but whatever. So now I'm going to increase the speed a little bit, increase the pressure, and blend this area in. Now, if you're a true beginner, hopefully one of the things going through your head right now is the fact that I am laying this rotary buffer right on this character line. That is a danger zone. That's how burnt edges happen. But because I have enough experience and I know the limitations of my buffer, the pad, the compounds, and I just have enough experience, I know that I do not have to worry about it. But in reality, because that is an edge, I know that that edge is being polished at a much greater speed than the flat areas, because the friction is being concentrated on that edge itself. But that's where I apply experience, and I want to show you guys how long I'm able to polish on that edge to get the results I want, but I'm still not in fear of burning that edge because I know there's still plenty of clear coat left. Now, if I was really doing high-end performance work, I would likely, it really depends on how high-end we're talking about. And by high-end, I mean a few things like A, what are the customer's expectations? Is he truly want perfection? Does he have a developed eye where he can determine what perfection really is? And is he paying for it? Because I'm going to treat a panel as a separate entity. And the panel itself is going to be dissected into areas. So this is essentially a perfectly flat panel right here, but then we have this character line, so we have a slope and then suddenly it levels off. So in the world of OCD or perfection, I would actually have to tape this off, sand it. What I would really do is I would sand it originally just by hand without taping it off. But when it came time to polishing it, because I want to retain as much of this edge as far as having clear coat on it, I'm going to treat this as a flat panel here without burning the edge, and I want to treat this as a flat panel here without burning the edge, because those two panels match up right here to create this character line. That becomes problematic. So you have to finesse it, and that's where taping it off, using different types of pressure, speeds, compounds, polishes come in. But honestly, that is where you don't need to overthink it, because that's not going to be most of your guys' world is that level of performance. And if it was, you likely would not be tuning into this video originally anyways. So I'm just going to blend it in. Let's say I was working for Johnny customer. They would come out, they would see my finished results, because at this point I'm just going to wipe off the residue. I'm going to lay some wax on it, and they would come out and wet themselves because the scratches are gone, as in the specific deeper scratches, as well as the overall scratching effect of the paint, and they will be absolutely ecstatic. So hopefully by seeing how much time that I'm spending with the buffer, the types of compounds I use, the fact that you can interchange a lot of things, which is breaking the rules. And I just do that just to, test, because I love to test. I love to figure out, how far I can push something and still get the results I want and still venture off the trail. And the trail in this moment is what the industry dictates. It's like the industry will say, oh, you have to always do this. B always comes after A. C always comes after B. So you always have to take it A, B, C, D in a linear path. Well, it's like, okay, well maybe, but maybe I know how to jump from A to C and circumvent B to save some time. I know I can produce the same results, so I just want to save some time. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to do any damage, and that's going to allow me to become even more profitable. So that's where I'm constantly toying with different methods, different techniques, different products, tools, equipment, go down the list. Hopefully you guys have learned a thing or two. And in the event that someone's going to make a comment, they're like, oh, Darren, you didn't bring this in for the final effect. Well, I'm not going to pull this out in the sun because A, there is no sun outside today anyways. So here we have the halogen, and I said this paint is not flawless. And I know through experience that I have, in fact, removed the swirl marks, the holograms, so I'm not worried about that. But nonetheless, here is the final product. You can do what you want. You can make whatever comments you want. Thumbs up it, like it, whatever. There's always going to be links below the show more box underneath each video, because I have many of you ask questions that are answered with the links. They'll say, hey, what's that buffer? Hey, where can I get that buffer? Hey, where can I get that fill in the blank? Always look in the description or the show more box. It's going to show you more information, which will likely take you to my website, where you will in fact get more information.